This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody who's joined us. I know it's 2:30, but we have people joining thick and fast. So I'm just going to give another minute or two for more audience members to dial in. But thank you very much for joining us. It's really nice to see this many people coming online for the webinar this afternoon. You'll see at the top of the title screen, there's a line of text that says go to www.menti.com and use the code 2975532. This is the way we're going to be doing some Q&A and a bit of sort of fun icebreaker introduction. That sounds awful now, and it really won't be. But this is the mechanism we're going to be using for some Q&A. So I would encourage you to pick up your phone or open a new window on your laptop and head out to menti.com and pop the code in, and you should see a welcome screen when you get there. Okay, we still have a few people joining, but I think we should make a start. So just a recap for anybody who dialed in a little while back. You should have had a notification when you joined in that this meeting's being recorded. If you're not happy about having your face on the recording, then keep your camera off. But if you are, then by all means, keep your camera on. Welcome aboard. I'd just like to take this opportunity to remind everybody, including myself, to put phones onto silent. And you can see on the top of the welcome screen, there is an instruction about a website called menti.com, and this is what we'll be using for some Q&A and finding out a bit about each other through the webinar this afternoon. So go to www.menti.com and type in the code 2975532, and it will take you to a welcome screen that mirrors this one. The code to type in is also in the chat box. Thanks, Amit, for the reminder. And I can see that quite a lot of people have got there already, because so far 13 people have hit the little heart button to show that they like. I'm going to kick us off. So in addition to the welcome to the audience and the reminder to everybody seeing the heart button now, to pop your phones on silent, I'd like to remind the audience also to keep the mic on mute just while the panelists and speakers are proceeding, so that we can hear them nice and clearly. And I'm going to do a very quick, brief introduction. You'll hear more about the speakers, panelists, and I will introduce them one at a time as they come on. But we're going to start with finding out a little bit about you. We can't possibly do a round of introductions with 50-something people. So if you go into the mentimeter.com and answer the first question, which is, where are you? Where are you located? we'd love to know where everybody's coming in from. And we're also interested in where do you work, not your organisation as such, just what sectors we have represented. Excellent. Okay, so quite a spread, lots of practitioners, which is great because that's primarily the audience for this afternoon. We've got some researchers, some industrial R&D, a few consultants, and I would have to put my hand up and say that I'm in that number these days. Quite a few from the food and bev industry and some from municipalities, water service providers, and so on. Okay, very nice spread of people. Well, welcome everybody, no matter where you're hailing from and where you work. It's really great to have you on board. I'm going to kick off now with an introduction for the first speaker panelist, and this is Tamar Weiss from AB InBev, not the local AB InBev. Tamar's located in Tel Aviv in Israel, and she's going to be talking to us today about how and why AB InBev has been innovating since March 2020. So if we can make Tamar the presenter.
Hi, so I'm Tamar, Global Innovation Manager at AB InBev. AB InBev, I hope that you all know, we're the #1 brewing company in the world with over 630 beer brands in 150 countries, and then also have additional beverages and our non-alcoholics, which is actually a function which is growing as well. As innovation manager, I work with the different, I see here, okay, sorry. As innovation manager, I work with the different functions. My focus is primarily on sustainability, procurement, and supply. So really working both with our global and zone functions to understand challenges, opportunities, see where technology and innovation can play a role, and then guide the projects through pilot to scale to really give impact and to see how we can use external startups and innovation to really help our business thrive. So I'm going to share with you just a couple of slides to give some context. Here we go. Into what we're doing. So firstly, we have a nice saying that says no water, no beer. So really when we look at water and innovation around water, this is a very important focus of ours. In general, AB InBev has set very clear sustainability goals, and sustainability is a leading strategy that, of course, goes hand in hand with our business and our strategy in general. But it's also all about how we can become a sustainable player and continue to produce our beer and beverages for the next 100 years. We also have a sustainability-oriented accelerator called the 100 Plus. And there also you can really see our challenges nicely defined. So in terms of water, we actually touch upon water across our supply chain in many different ways. So as a brewing company, we really actually look at the full supply chain, starting from our agriculture, our farmers growing barley, hops, rice, additional crops as well. We have 30,000 direct farmers, as well as additional contracts with additional farmers across the globe. And here we also have a sustainability goal that was set that we want 100% of our direct farmers to be skilled, financially empowered, and we continue to work with them through our agronomists to help them increase yield and improve their income. Of course, irrigation and water management in agriculture is a very important thing. So here too, where we continue to look all the time how we can improve water practices in farming, how we can introduce smart irrigation solutions, and really work with our farmers in this respect as well. Although we're a global company, we actually are very locally situated and play an important part in the communities where we are. So as part of that, we actually also have our access to water and disaster relief element, especially focused on watershed security, which is a very important topic for us, and especially in countries around Africa, India, certain places in Middle America, South America, where water is a big issue. We have many projects and collaborations to try and solve these questions as well. Moving into our own production. So we have over 300 breweries across the world, and then you add to that also malting plants and additional facilities. And here too, water, of course, plays a major role. One of our leading goals is to try and become as efficient with our water as possible. We're already very, very good. Like if you compare us to other brewing companies, where sometimes the ratio is 4-to-1 for hectoliters of water to produce 1 of beer. Our goal is to go down as far as 2-to-1, and we're very close to that already. But here too, in terms of technology and innovation, so it's really across the span of things, from just improving our identification of leaks, our water efficiency, as well as water treatment, recycle and reuse, water quality monitoring. So we really have quite a lot of different things around water, which we continue to pursue in our breweries. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention, which is somewhat of a different kind, but really we have a big focus also on how we can engage our consumers through our brands, and also to use our brands to really help make an impact and a positive change in the world. So Stella, for example, is a brand which we've committed specifically to water, and we've had initiatives where certain amounts of the profit of Stella were then donated to, let's say, water.org or different water initiatives to help through that as well. When we think about COVID-19, so of course, this broke out in March, basically, in China and other places in APAC, obviously earlier, but the main impact on our business has really been felt since March. And in a way, like this has also shifted how we're thinking about innovation in general, and taking into consideration the constraints, having to do things remotely, things which we all feel in our day-to-day life, obviously also with some specific aspects related to water. So around the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that's been going on, we've really been working endlessly from many different angles to see also how we can ensure our own business continuity, but also, again, contribute to our community, be there for our consumers, and help the world in this crisis. So in terms of business continuity, the focus has been, firstly, making sure that we keep our people healthy and safe. This is through both, we've been looking at many different solutions and setting up a new infrastructure for this new reality in terms of detection solutions, protection solutions, and disinfection. So really thinking how we can help detect early on employees which have the virus, and also think how we can help with access to sanitation and hygiene, which relates to water a little bit more clearly. So here we've also really have a lot of new initiatives, both technology, but also process, to make sure that everyone, from our employees to our truck drivers to everything across our supply chain has this access to sanitation and hygiene, to water and soap, to sanitizer and things like that. Another big element when it comes to business continuity is the whole question of remote maintenance, how we can start doing things remotely, introduce not only, of course, we've all moved to Zoom, but also for the brewery itself, how experts can access specific machines and explain what needs to be done from afar. And in general, remote maintenance, of course, is becoming a pressing issue. And in the day-to-day, also how we can continue to move forward, to test new technologies, to introduce new solutions from afar. For our community, in addition to what we're doing in general with watershed protection, another big element has been to provide water from our breweries to frontline workers and communities in need. And we've also started producing hand sanitizer in different facilities from our leftover alcohol and things like that, and providing that to hospitals and frontline workers as well. Last but not least, of course, being there for our consumers, whether it's initiatives for supporting health, mental health, and just thinking all the time how we can give value, how we can help also our the different restaurants, our retailers, provide them with solutions according to their need. And specifically also, for example, Budweiser has been partnering with the American Red Cross to support blood drives, and we've had additional initiatives of this kind as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Tamara, is that the conclusion?
Yeah, sorry if that
No,
wasn't clear.
perfect. Your timing is absolutely spot on. I thought it was, but I didn't want to interrupt you. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. And I've been scribbling down questions for the Q&A roundtable discussion at the very end. So fantastic. Thank you. Our next quick 10-minute slot will be presented by Kevin Cilliers. So we will see his slides in just a moment. We are now moving our speakers into South Africa. Kevin comes to us from the National Cleaner Production Centre, and he's going to be talking to us about using cleaner production technologies to decrease cost and increase competitiveness. That's great, Kevin. We can see your slides. Kevin, as yet we can't hear you. I don't know if it's a little lag or you're still on mute.
Stupidity on my part, apologies. Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kevin Cilliers. I'm the Regional Manager for the National Cleaner Production Centre, based and located in Durban, one of 3 regional sites. And today, I'm actually being asked to present on cleaner production technologies to decrease costs and increase in competitiveness for industry. And I've taken a little bit of a different spin on this, simply because in our line of work, technology is not necessarily the key and first focus of us, but our interventions and recommendations will build up to that. But perhaps my presentation will explain it a little bit more, and hopefully it will move along. Yeah. Okay. So let me just explain a little bit. In terms of the National Cleaner Production Centre, our cleaner production methodology approach has always been to try and engage companies and provide them assistance to help them gain a better understanding of their consumption trends and patterns. And in this case, our theme is water today, so let's talk about it from a water perspective. And generally what we would do as part of giving them insight to what their trends and patterns are around consumption, we would also look at aspects like helping them with regression analysis and determining baseline. The baseline typically gives the company a peg in the sand, which they're able to assess and evaluate where they are in terms of consumption, and then be able to move into the next phase of starting to identify opportunities or gap areas where they can make improvements. And then once they move into that, it will then enable them to be able to measure whether the intervention that they may have considered has been effective or not. And our approach in this has always been to start with the quick wins, low cost opportunities, which would actually allow to gain those quick wins. And it also allows buy-in from the different stakeholders, particularly the individual that might be holding the purse strings. And that once the excitement builds, then it can allow you to start moving into more capital intensive interventions. So we might see an approach where you might look at initially typically housekeeping and maintenance issues. This could be looking at leaks, for example, in a system, or it could, in the maintenance format, could be looking at things like steam traps and that might be passing a live steam and you're losing water from your system. Once that has been addressed for most part, you can then look at the opportunity to explore your process of efficiency, optimize opportunities. And here we might experience things from a behavioral aspect, where the way that the plant and the process has been operated could result in wastage of resources and water. This could be something of machines operating and running when there's no actual production taking place. On the operational side, it could be speaking to things like, for example, blowdowns on your steam system, or perhaps blowdowns on your on things like cooling towers, where if those are not controlled properly, you can have excessive losses of the water resource. And only once we have actually got through all of that and optimized those to as far as reasonably possible, then we might be looking at stepping into specific technology interventions. And having done that, the next phase would then be to move into the implementation side and start implementing suggestions to make improvements. And that's something that we've been observing and experiencing over the last 12 or so years that NCPC, or 15 years that NCPC has been around. What we are commonly seeing is that very often companies are making investments into efficiency, into improvements, and we're finding that they're unable to actually quantify and determine whether the intervention has been successful or not, or at least how much it has actually saved them. And that stems largely from the fact that in many instances, something important like monitoring and metering is typically not well done. And even more so when it comes to sub-metering within an organization. Very often companies don't have a very good idea of where a resource like water is being used. They might know how much they use in total, but exactly where and why it's being used sometimes can be a bit of a mystery. That happening also leads us to occurrences like where baseline development is either not well understood, or it's actually generally not done because the data and information is not necessarily available. Active monitoring and metering systems as well very often are not existent, and this is probably particularly more applicable to the smaller companies and organizations. The larger guys, they know these are substantial costs and very often have mechanisms in place, but not always are those totally soundproof as well. So it is something for all sizes and shapes of companies to consider. And then the last element there is that not only around monitoring and metering, but when we start moving into aspects of targeting around water or resource consumption, that is often not even done at all. And the targeting really is a really key aspect of the whole monitoring and metering, where you could start using the data you've collected to actually set that up to start allowing you to forecast and possibly predict your consumption under specific conditions. And if you're able to do that, then you can start responding to situations where you may find that you're either exceeding your scheduled or planned consumption volumes, or if it's going to be a problem with discharges and things like that, then you can put in appropriate measures to address it. So not having all of this really begs the question, how can you manage something if it's not really being measured? So if I have to revert to the question about, so what about technology and which one do we think we would propose? And as I've indicated, it's probably a little unfair to go with one. If we look at technologies, we find a couple of things that happen. And that one is that by all means, technology interventions definitely have a place and a role, but typically need to be considered either in parallel or after optimization of your existing system has been reasonably exhausted. The other aspect of technology is that very often you find that technology solutions can be quite diverse and are plant specific, and therefore it makes it quite difficult to say one is better than the other and this is the preferred one. So if pushed into a corner, from my perspective, I would probably look at choosing, if I had to choose technology, I would probably lean towards something like monitoring and metering technology, because that is something, if it's done properly and correctly in an organization, provides them with an opportunity to be able to get a good sense of where they are, be able to set goals and targets of where they want to be, and be able to measure the performance against that to see how they are tracking with that. And in doing that, it gives them an opportunity to reduce costs and allows them to also improve and increase their competitiveness in the longer term. And we're also seeing, based on various literature and studies that have been undertaken, that while a monitoring and metering system won't specifically realize savings, what we are seeing is that simply the awareness created by the system very often results in human behavior change, which in turn leads to almost subconscious changes in the way people do things, and results in increased or improved resource efficiency. And we've seen in monitoring and metering that sometimes up to a 5% reduction can be achieved through those behavior changes. So in linking the topic now with the time of COVID and looking at innovating, and maybe this is rather a simplistic view and take, but I think from a monitoring and metering technology perspective, I think the COVID presents a very sad but rather timeless opportunity to industry to allow them to allocate time to addressing something that typically is not that well done in the South African industry sector space. And that is, the current economic landscape is actually forcing many companies to play and organizations to place a very high focus on cost containment and cost management. And in doing that, monitoring and metering provides an opportunity to get a good sense of what's actually going on around your consumption and allow mechanisms to be put in place to control those resource consumptions. In the second instance is that at the same time, during the COVID pandemic now and the impact of it, where many industries have been forced to reduce their operations and are now in the process of ramping up to full production, there may be the opportunity that some resources are not necessarily fully allocated, and this could be an appropriate opportunity to give some time to resource efficiency now and metering and monitoring. So, conclusion, what we could look at is that there are options around monitoring, and it really doesn't be the Rolls Royce of really it needs to look at more a fit for purpose option, considering things like what is your budget, what you want to undertake, and what is it you want to achieve with your metering. And in doing that, then decisions can be made around whether we need to go very fancy and consider fully automated smart metering options, which may allow online real-time data collection, or alternately, if we are in a smaller company and the budget is slightly more constrained, then perhaps a more manual type of approach would be appropriate, allowing physical readings to be taken, which can be captured on a central database or even in a spreadsheet. And I think what's important here, it's not really so significant what system you have, but it's more important about what you do with the information you gather. And I think the key parting shot for me out of this is that it's really critical for companies to utilize the system that will allow proper reporting of their performance, to showcase what's actually going on and happening in their organization, which will allow them to evaluate how good the performance is and predict what their future patterns might be to enable appropriate planning or response mechanisms to be put in place. So I hope that maybe shares a little bit with you, maybe gives some food for thought. And I think my details are on the last slide, which I'll show in a few seconds. And you're welcome to contact us if you need any follow-up on this. So here's an example of some of the information you can extract and get. It doesn't have to only apply to water necessarily, but can be expanded and extended to other resource consumption values as well. So with that, thank you very much.
Kevin, that was great. Thank you very much indeed. And much like Tamar's talk, I've now got a couple of questions lined up just in case there's nothing at the round table. And I kind of selfishly hope there isn't, but I can always ask you afterwards as well. Okay, wonderful. Folks, thank you. We are halfway through our guest presenter stroke panelists. And at this point, we're going to take a quick pause and ask you a couple of questions. So if we go back to Mentimeter, again, it's www.menti.com and put in the code 2975532, and you may need just to send the slide on to the next one if it doesn't refresh. But we're interested in finding out what's driving innovation in your organization. And this could be cost savings in general, it might be energy or water savings, it might be regulatory drivers or corporate goals, something we haven't thought of, or maybe you're finding that no innovation has really happened or nothing's really changed since COVID-19 came along, and the answer is nothing's driving innovation. Can I just remind all the audience to keep their microphones on mute, please? Thank you.
Dennis,
I thought.
I can hear you.
Saeed, not to pick on you, but would you put your microphone on mute, please? I think we can hear your phone call.
That's not mine, sorry. Why must I?
Okay. Right, if we turn our attention back to the question to the audience, we see a lot of organisations are being driven to innovate either by water savings or by corporate goals. And this is very interesting. This shows the power of a desire for water stewardship in the industrial sector as a whole. It's not so much the idea of saving money or saving money spent on resources like energy, but much more around the desire to save water, particularly on a continent like ours. Africa and the Middle East is extremely water stressed, for example, but also those stretching corporate goals where we're seeing increasing numbers of organisations joining networks like the Strategic Water Partners Network or the CEO Water Compact. And as a result of that, they're providing corporate goals for themselves that are not driven by external legislation. So this is great to see, actually. I think we have one more Mentimeter question. And that is for anybody who thinks that they are not innovating or not innovating as fast or as much as they would like. Why not? What is holding you back? Is it a lack of funding? Is it the fact that you'd like to, but the organisation doesn't really see how to? Is it risk aversion caused by regulatory frameworks that you have to operate in? Is it the fact that it's an add-on to somebody's day job and it's not really anyone's job to make it happen, so anybody could do it, but nobody does it, and everyone thinks that somebody will do it? Is nothing holding you back? Can you do everything you want? Or is it something else? So once again, this is interesting. A lot of people are saying, or a small majority is saying, no clear pathways at the moment, and that suggests a greater appetite for innovation than there is the real or perceived ability to innovate. Okay, now neck and neck with regulations, which is also interesting. So about half the audience have voted so far. I've had one comment that somebody can't see the slide. It might be a case that you need to refresh on menti.com on either your phone or your laptop or wherever you're looking at it. But interesting, very interesting. Okay, so the votes in so far are that 2 lucky people aren't held back by anything and have the ability to innovate freely and at will, I hope. I hope that's the truth. There are a few people saying that they are restricted by budget, restricted by the fact that it's nobody's day job to innovate. But the most popular answer of all is that there's no clear pathway to innovation. And this is something that we see cross-sectorally, actually. So even in a company which is very good about piloting and trials, sometimes it's very difficult to take one example of best practice and turn that into common practice throughout the business. And it's something obviously that we need to work on, not only in this sector, but in other manufacturing sectors and in the water industry itself. Okay, folks, at this point, those of you with the agenda in front of you will notice that we have a 5-minute comfort break. So this is the opportunity to just stretch your legs and stand up and shake around a little bit, and probably grab a cold drink if, like me, you are nice and cozy and warm in South Africa. And we'll be coming back for our next 2 speaker panelists in exactly 5 minutes time, so 15:16 South Africa time. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you've got something cool at your elbow and you've stretched and made yourself a little more comfortable. And we're now going to proceed with the next two speaker panelists for this afternoon's event. The first one is Dr. Henry Roman, and Henry works at the Department of Science and Innovation here in Pretoria in South Africa. He's going to be talking to us for 10 minutes on green economic stimulus options for the post-pandemic world. And in a moment, we should be able to see Henry in his slides. We can see Henry. That's a good start.
Thanks, Jo. I don't have any slides. I will only be, I'll be speaking. So mine will be a little bit of a philosophical one combined with some practical things that the DSI can do in this green economic stimulus environment. The DSI, for those that don't know, is the National Department of Science and Innovation, previously the Department of Science and Technology. And our mandate is to undertake research, development, and innovation in South Africa through various means. Amongst them is obviously human capital development, high-end skills, and promoting R&D both in our academic institutions, our science councils, as well as with private sector. Now, last week, the President Ramaphosa addressed a joint sitting of Parliament on South Africa's Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. The objectives of this plan are to create jobs, and here he's looking primarily through aggressive infrastructure investment and mass employment schemes or programs. Amongst these, you could look at things where we, in the water sector, are looking at working for water as a program, potentially boosting a program like that and to create mass employment in a post-COVID recovery. Also looking at reindustrializing our economy, focusing on growing small businesses. As we know, the SME space is what you focus on when you want to grow the economy. Industrializing our economy also presents us that opportunity that Kevin outlined around becoming more efficient in our resource utilization. Accelerating economic reforms to unlock investment and growth, fighting crime and corruption, and improving the capability of the state. The capability of the state also includes how different government departments actually start working together to achieve those outcomes and those goals. Now, I'm not an economist, but it's pretty obvious to most that there's a lot of work to be done in stabilizing and growing our economy as well as the global economy, which has taken quite a severe knock in this time of COVID. And has taught us, in my view, has taught us a lot about what to do in future when the next pandemic comes, not to do. The president also indicated that it will take an extraordinary effort to recover from the shock of this pandemic. As you know, the country was already in an economic decline before COVID hit us, and it just exacerbated what was already a pretty bad situation. However, when he was speaking, what I heard and what I took away is that there is actually an opportunity for us to disrupt what is the current regime, turn it around, because surely we can't do any worse damage to the global and local economies than has already been done through our linear economic approaches to how we grow our economies in different countries. Within this recovery plan, we're looking at secure energy supply. That's related to water as well. It's not independent of water. We must always remember everything is intertwined in some way. We're looking at more than 1 trillion rand in infrastructure investment over the next 4 years. That is a number I can't even comprehend, but there's an opportunity there, and I'll come back to that. But the one part that got my attention, and I quote, is it will be digital, green, and sustainable, and it will invest in our human capital to lay the foundations for the future, end quote. And that talks to me as an employee of the DSI. And I'll come back to the digital part, but green, sustainable, and human capital to lay the foundations for the future are the ingredients you need to build back better for a green and blue planet with some brown. You can't get away from the deserts that do exist. They have a role to play. But the disruption I spoke about that the system needs relates to the transition to a more circular economy, which keeps our resources in flow for as long as possible at their maximum value. It's also about being efficient in our use of those natural resources. Now, I already mentioned the SMEs, but government also has a role to play here in preferential procurement potentially. The means to drive the transition by procuring goods and services from companies that have circular economy at their core. There's also a role to play for multinational companies, because they can also increase the participation of local small businesses in their supply chains, and thereby they can stimulate job creation. But the options from DSI is, last year we had the new white paper on science, tech and innovation that was published and approved by Cabinet. And one of the tasks of our department is to coordinate the national system of innovation. Now, within this system of innovation, there are entities that report directly to our minister, the National Research Foundation, Technology Innovation Agency, and the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research. They all have different roles that they play within this innovation continuum. The NRF builds the capacities that we will need at the level of masters and PhDs. And now with our department being married to Department of Higher Education and Training, we have access to the CETAs as well for those other much needed technical roles that have to be put in place. TIA have a focus on water security in their new strategic plan, and the CSR, as I understand, is also in the process of establishing a water center. Now, there's opportunities that exist for partnership with these entities in the space, and TIA in particular has funding to assist with development aspects to get you closer to markets, such as IP issues, etc. We also have NIPMO, the National Intellectual Property Management Office within the DSI, that is specifically mandated to look after intellectual property developed with public funding. We also have WADA. It's a partnership between the DSI and the WRC. This is to demonstrate innovative water tech, establish test beds with municipalities and water utilities. So you saw quite a lot of focus on water efficiency. It's interesting because I see that in the projects that come through for funding on the WADA platform as well. Big focus on water efficiency. There's over 30 technologies that have been tested, and they also have technology advisory notes for inbound technology. So we're not excluding that which has been done elsewhere, if it's applicable and appropriate to the South African conditions. NCPC spoke, they're also involved in water efficiency and energy efficiency. The last one I want to talk to is the R&D tax incentive, Section 11D of the Income Tax Act, to promote private sector R&D investment. The purpose behind this incentive is to encourage business to conduct scientific and technological research in South Africa to drive that culture for innovation. What this incentive allows, it allows you to get a 150% deduction of proven R&D expenditure when determining your taxable income. There's a process by which this happens. We're aiming for a 90-day turnaround on that process within the department, and it's available. It's been utilized quite extensively by lots of small players and bigger players as well. Then the digital part, which I wanted to come back to, is, like Kevin said, you cannot manage what you cannot measure or collect data on. So if we want to build back better and green, we need to invest in the digital future as well. And there I'm talking particularly to data science. It's very high on the skills requirements for many people, industries and countries. And we need an understanding of different systems, what happens within the systems, and what happens when the systems intersect with each other as well. Those sectors or systems at play within our space. And the complexity of the water, energy, food nexus needs the data that's collected to be translated to useful information, so decisions can be made. Just merely collecting reams of data is useless unless it tells somebody something that they can then act on. Something to think about is for this infrastructure bill, the 1 trillion enormous number, I think we should start thinking about materials for that infrastructure. For instance, pipes. Can the pipes contain and like an RFID that transmits data in real time, and then through machine learning can predict pipe bursts, enabling a technician somewhere to go and make those repairs before the water loss actually happens? Can we not rethink our wastewater treatment works and speak of them as water factories? This is a term I learned last year when in Denmark. So we don't only produce clean water from wastewater, but the value added products and services we can also produce from that wastewater treatment works. Can we not improve the water efficiency in industry, but at households as well? So every person in the country has a role to play to conserve this resource. Because the transition to a circular economy is a whole of society approach. And the last one relates back to what Tamar was speaking about. Brand owners can influence consumers to be more conscious of the right things to do. So understanding the problems we face and their complexity also calls for co-creation of solutions across government departments, with industry, with academia, and with society. We need to define the implementation parameters for each of these partners and trust that each one will do what they need to do. And in closing, I truly believe that South Africa has the different parts of the machine, but they're lying all over the place like a dirty workshop. And what we need to do is to put those parts together and create the machine that will achieve the goals that the president has outlined. Thank you.
Henry, thank you so much. That was a fascinating and, for me, quite inspiring set of information about what we can do and how we can seize the post-pandemic world and make it better than the old world. And for sure, there are things in the old world that I will not miss. Our last speaker panelist for this afternoon is Namisha, and she comes to us from the Department of Water and Sanitation. She does have slides, and in a moment we should be able to see them. But I'm particularly interested in Namisha's presentation now because the Mentimeter question earlier showed that risk aversion due to either real or perceived regulatory constraints is holding back innovation for some people in the audience. So I'll be very interested to hear from Namisha what's the viewpoint is from the Department of Water and Sanitation, which is the regulatory body for water and surface water bodies in South Africa. So Namisha, over to you.
Thanks, Jo. I'm unable to share my screen. It says that yours is sharing.
I can see your screen. It says that mine is sharing.
Okay, sorry. Can you just bear with me?
Yes, of course, no problem. Oh, that's gorgeous.
Okay.
We can see your whole screen, including your slide at the moment.
Okay, yeah, it's I've just got this GoToMeeting blocking my screen. I just need to get it out of the way. Just a minute. Okay,
Sure
if
thing.
you can see that. Okay.
Bingo,
Can you see the screen? Okay, thank you.
Yep. Awesome.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Namisha Mathraprasad. I'm from the Department of Water and Sanitation, from the Compliance Monitoring Unit. I specifically deal with paper and pulp mills and sugar mills, as well as the packaging industry as well. So I'm going to just outline my presentation to discuss what is the regulatory framework, the governance structures, what is the National Water Act in terms of water uses, what uses we do have, how we define water resource protection, how we do enforcement, and what is our current work plan under COVID conditions. Okay, so our regulatory framework is we are governed by Section 24 of the Constitution. Everyone has the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. And from there, in terms of National Water Act, the white paper on national water policy was developed in 1997. This led to the development of National Water Act 1998, because the Constitution came into 1994 And before that, it was the 1956 Water Act, and we needed a new act that was more equitable and sustainable. So as to how we develop regulations itself and how we define outcomes, we found that there has to be a demand, and then we must create support and resources for that. And that is driven by government, and then our outputs come into a policy, which will either be then result in changes in legislation. We develop regulations or strategies, and then we have to monitor those behaviors and implement those regulations. In terms of the governance structures, how we cooperate between national, provincial, and local government, we develop legislation at national level with policies, strategies, and regulations, and these can get developed into bylaws. So the bylaws must feed into national legislation requirements. The National Water Act was developed in 1998, and it recognizes the prediction of water resources defined as a watercourse, surface water, estuary, or aquifer. A watercourse is further defined by a river, spring, a natural channel in which water flows regularly or intermittently, wetland, lake, dam, or anything that can be declared under Section 38. So the National Water Act gives us quite a wide variety of watercourses or definitions of watercourses, how we see water, and how we also see interconnectivity. So Section 21 of the Act defines the water uses, and the authorizations that exist are four. There's the license that we give, a general authorization, which is for lower risk, a Schedule 1, which is just for people who are doing non-commercial use of water, and there's an existing lawful use. An existing lawful use is something that was carried over from before 1998, where legal permit holders were regarded as legal entities. So this is just a summary of what I spoke of Section 21. I'm not going to go through all of them due to time constraints, but we have A through to K, and they range from taking water, storing water, affecting the biota and flora and the habitat of a river in terms of whether you divert a river or not. There's afforestation, and then there's the water quality related discharges and storage. For all of these, a water use authorization will be required. So background to our users, our authorized water users either use raw water directly from the water resources, or they manage wastewater from their processes in relation to water resources. There are different branches in the department, and the one that specifically deals with water use is the branch regulation. So there's licensing and compliance monitoring and enforcement duties which we impose on the users. The existing lawful use is for water users prior to the promulgation of National Water Act, and there are specific conditions for being defined as legal entities. This simply means that if you were using water before 1998 without an authorization, in this case the 1956 Water Act or the 1913 Irrigation Act, you are not a legal entity. You had to have had a permit of some sort or shown some sort of a permit under another act that related to maybe changing the habitat or forestation for you to be regarded as legal. To be defined as existing lawful use, you will get a Section 35 letter under the Act to say that you have been verified, and then you will use that as your springboard for your self-monitoring. So why do we need to monitor the users? Because they're in proximity of watercourses and they encroach directly into our water resources. So if we are a dry country, we cannot affect the habitat of our water resources. Our coastal areas are also affected, that is governed up to the estuary point by water affairs, water and sanitation, and actual further coastal areas are governed by our sister department, which is environmental affairs. So water users can either fall within a municipal area for direct supply of water and discharge of wastewater to that municipality. So what happens here is that water affairs, if you are taking water directly from a watercourse, you get a water use license from Department of Water and Sanitation. In this case, the municipal area, he will have many different users, domestic and industrial users. The user will have an agreement with the municipality to use water, or a trade effluent agreement to discharge water. And specifications in water quality will be defined there. The municipality then will have the water use authorization with water and sanitation, and the mandate to monitor the industry then lies with the municipality. Okay, so how we define water resource protection. These are the basics that we use that we look for when we go to do audits or when a licensing application comes in. Because we are the second driest country in the world, we deal a lot with interconnectivity between groundwater and surface water systems, and it's very important in maintaining our water balances because we have such a high evaporation rate and we have such variable rainfall. Secondly, rehabilitation or restoration measures must be in line with resource quality objectives. So the Act allows or specifies that the minister must classify resources and then from there must create resource quality objectives. These are basically the healthy objectives that we need for the water resource to be functioning in order for us to meet the reserve. A reserve is defined as the ecological reserve and basic human needs reserve. So what you need to drink and what the environment needs to survive at optimal phase while allowing development. One of the new research areas that has come up in the past few years in the department is hydropodology and the aspect of water in the landscape. We found that this requires continuous assessment for the protection of the hydrological systems and the reserve. Specifically more because, referring back to point one, there is a lot of interconnectivity between groundwater and surface water systems. And the reason we do this is because we want sustainable use for future generations and equitable allocation and sourcing avenues for smarter ways to work better. As government, we also accept that climate change is real and its impacts are always brought into the conversation in our department. So in South Africa, we expect to have varied precipitation, varied intensity, and therefore increased vulnerability. So working with the old manners of how you did working with water will not help us adapt. You have to be much more smarter in the way we work so that we can be more resilient as a country in terms of our water resources for economic development. I'll then speak about enforcement for protection. So the department creates regulations and we monitor water users. There's also the sections where we do planning and store information as part of the department in terms of water resources. Our infrastructure branch deals with the water supply in our dams. So why do we enforce? Firstly, we have to make regulations to define how to use water. We then must protect the basic human needs and ecological needs reserve. And the reason for this is that we have to have sustainable and equitable use. And therefore, we must control water. We must have control of water use. So once you get a license, or if you have been using water illegally, there are certain parts of the Act that allow us to control and monitor how you use your water. Section 19 of the Act specifically states where you have to do pollution prevention as a water user. It is your responsibility. Section 53 is where we come in, where we allow you for the rectification of contraventions. Section 254, we can withdraw and suspend your entitlements if you do not correct. And Section 151 is the offences, where we will issue you with directives for administrative and criminal prosecutions. We first administer administrative directives in order to bring you into compliance, and if that doesn't work, then we go to criminal prosecution, and then we are based on the court's time. Financial provisions must be made for rectification, and the costs can be further recovered from the transgressor if corrective work is done by the department. The Act allows us to do that. We also have the waste discharge charge system, which has been developed and it has been verified and checked, and we follow the polluter pays principle. Compulsory licensing is another tool that we can use in the Act when we have stressed catchments. This is in order to make sure that we have equal water for all with economic development. We can further, under Section 26 of the Act, develop regulations as to how to define conditions of use. So in terms of what has happened to our work plan, I can specifically talk to regulation branch, is that we have been affected by the lockdown. And however, we found that using online systems, we've had time to think about how to use them and incorporate them into our work. And we found that in certain instances, they actually do work quite well. Our licensing system is fully online, but we do have walk-in centers in our departments for those who do not have online systems. But one thing that must happen is that water use habits must improve in order for us to use water efficiently. We cannot go back to wastage of water. It is my opinion that there is a general lack of respect for water in South Africa. We've seen it even during the drought that we recently had, where we would get to site and users would simply just have their aquifer pumps running 24 hours a day. And it didn't matter that we were in a 5-year drought. They simply said, I can afford the water, I'm going to use it, and it's on my land. So water user habits have to improve for us to be much more water efficient. We have no other way besides being efficient because we are dry. We are a dry country. In terms of the authorizations, they guide the water user on the water use. And I want to dwell a few minutes on this because we specifically have very site-specific conditions for the water user here if you get a license. So what we found by interaction with certain industries is they said things that have helped them to understand water more have been conditions in the license, specifically asking about rehabilitation, guiding them on rehabilitation, guiding them on the integrated wastewater management plan. That has been one of the better successes of the department, where users themselves feel that they have to do this on a yearly basis and that it kept them on tap or the yearly up-to-date progress with their water use license and how they use water. They could understand water better. And one thing that has been asked for is that they would like a specific water conservation and demand management target set. And so this has also helped us understand and improve our relationship with water users, because we do have users that want to improve. They, of course, want to save costs in terms of water use and energy use, but we do have those that also do not want to understand. So there's a 50-50 balance. And what we then do is we have increased efforts in compliance promotion. So this is specifically to target users. We target all sectors, and we try and we have our industrial sector also targeted. Plus, I specifically do it with the mills. And this is where we go through each and every condition of the license with the water user. And if something is wrong, let's say in the geohydro report or in their annual biomonitoring report, we give them feedback, and then they are allowed to discuss it and correct that so that we can improve. One of the big things that we must do is we specify that there must be yearly audits in the license for conditions. So annual internal audits that the water user must do himself, and external audits that can be done yearly itself. And what this has done, we've seen, is that water users are better understanding their water use licenses, and they seem to be better at submitting data to the department as well. We have online systems for the submission of data, and that has improved, but of course this year has been a bit more difficult because industries have not been running, even agricultural users have not been running. And so there has been some delay in getting that data to us. What we also promote, yes, okay, I'm nearly done.
I'm sorry, can I politely ask you to conclude?
Sorry? Hello?
Sorry, I was just going to politely ask if you could conclude.
Yes, I think this is my last slide.
Thanks.
What we are promoting is the exploration of smarter ways of using and monitoring water use. We have seen smart metering in use in some areas where everything is recorded online. And an example of this is we have the metering regulation specified for agricultural users. What we have explored a lot this year is desktop audits using GIS. It is working quite well, but where we do need site visits, we then go to site. It is quite easier to do site visits on a large industry or a large site, because you can easily socially distance on site. We are also doing online meetings and online submissions of documents. And in terms of using GIS capabilities, we were exploring remote sensing. We are exploring GPS-based systems. We have worked this year already with a couple of users who had incorrect GPS and GIS information, which we managed to correct via online meetings and online submissions. So desktop audits at this time using GIS is working quite well for us. In conclusion, I would say we need better cooperation between our sectors and between our governments, because we want to move to a where we would like to see much more management of water from a cradle to grave approach, including your waste management. We need, of course, more information sharing and knowledge development, and an increase in the skills sector. And one thing we cannot go away from is to improve water conservation and demand management for sustainable use, because we just do not have that water to spare. And we need all efforts from all sectors in society for the respect of water. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. It was really nice to get the regulatory viewpoint. Okay, that is the last of our 4 speaker presenters. So we have one more Menti question for the audience, and then we will be unleashing the roundtable Q&A on our speaker presenters. So what I would like you to do is just turn your attention briefly back to mentimeter.com. And you'll see that there's a bit of a word cloud building because the slide has been waiting there for us to pay it a little bit of attention. And the question is, what has the COVID-19 pandemic changed that either makes innovating harder or easier for your organization? And some of the answers might be that the paradigm has shifted, or it's more important to cut costs, that it's now possible to do things remotely that the powers that be said were not possible previously. But I'd just be interested to see what kinds of words pop up as we consider this question. As the word cloud evolves, I can see there are a few different ways of people expressing things like remote monitoring of workforce and assets has become more important or essential in a way that it wasn't before the pandemic. There are a lot of things about remote working changing priorities, remote working being encouraged, more digital work, distance working and virtual instruments, tools and equipment. So this has obviously made a big impact on everybody's life. I heard somebody from the artificial intelligence technology space express recently that the first 5 months of the pandemic launched the technology that he works with forward by about 5 years, if it had been developing at the rate that it was before the pandemic. And I thought that was a very interesting opinion. And it looks as if there's a lot of people in this webinar that would bear this out. Okay, that is very, very interesting to see. We're now going to have a Q&A session with the 4 speakers that we've had today. So I'd like to ask the 4 of them to please pop their cameras on, and I will change my view to see everyone rather than just who's talking. If you have a question for the presenter, then please switch your camera on and we will call on you by name if it says your name on the screen, and you can pose your presenter, please, directing it to the particular person that you want to aim it at. And if it's a general question, then you can say that too. So who is going to be brave? Who has the first question for somebody on the panel? Okay, please go ahead. You came off mute and then you went back on it. I'm not sure if, yeah.
Sorry about that. The question is for Tamar Vice, please. Tamar, You said that you're doing a lot of work on saving water on irrigation schemes. Is there any work done to look at the crops to reuse water, reuse the water that's used for irrigation on any of your farms? Any research work done on that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Firstly, because we have farmers really in different regions with different challenges, so obviously also the innovation and the technologies that are necessary really vary. So farmers in North America versus smallholder farmers in Africa have different technologies, and some, yes, like are already very far along. And again, like it also really depends on what's going on in the region in general. Now, one thing to clarify is that ABI, obviously, we're not an agriculture company. So a lot of also the solutions that we offer to our farmers or the projects that we do are in partnership. And especially when it comes now to solutions and technology and irrigation even specifically, most of our focus is really on smallholder. So we have more initiatives towards helping improve the infrastructure in general, but also the skills and the solutions that are available for our farmers in places like Africa and India. And there's also obviously still a larger challenge and gap. So it really depends on what the local practices are. There are places which are already doing amazing things with water and that, it's pretty efficient. There are other places where there's still more of a need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, I threatened a couple of questions. And one of the ones I wanted to ask was for Henry. Historically, the DSI has had instruments in place with things like tax incentives for companies that undertake R&D. And I was wondering whether you had any information on whether those incentives or instruments have been used more during the time of the pandemic than previously, or any other insights into the kind of uptake of the incentives that are available.
Thanks, Joe. I don't work with the tax incentive, but I have requested the director responsible if she can update me, but I haven't had a response as yet. However, what I can say is once we went into lockdown and certain things were not coming into the country as
Henry seems to have frozen for me. Is it just me?
No, it's frozen for me as well.
sorry,
Okay.
I lost connection. I'm back.
Welcome back.
Thanks. I don't know where I got cancelled.
You were waiting for an update on the uptake, and then you said, however, and then we lost you.
Okay, so what the crisis did do for us is that, as you know, the R&D the system takes a long time to build the foundations for. So what it did allow was, as you know, import of ventilators was not that easy at the initial stages under lockdown level 5. But the system that had been created through advanced manufacturing with the CSR allowed us to rapidly develop ventilators for South Africa off our own base. So from a perspective of how to respond for a pandemic, I would say you need to allow time to build that foundational structure that can respond rapidly when the time is right. To think we responded in 3 months and we went from zero to product is an incorrect way of looking at it. It's about 10 years worth of background work that allowed you to go from zero to product in 3 months. It doesn't happen overnight. Science is not CSI on TV. It takes time and effort and a lot of investment before you get there. So I just wanted to make that point. But in terms of uptake of incentives, there's been a lot of proposals coming our way, some interesting, some exotic, for lack of a better word, and some really good that we could action in a short space of time. As you know, government has put money aside for COVID responses. So that money also included things like manufacturing ventilators, using and things like 3D printing becoming more prevalent as well. The use thereof to build gadgets or widgets that can help us.
Excellent, Henry. Thank you for that insight. Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, then I'm aware that the time is 15:58 and we promised you that we would be finishing by 4 o'clock. And if people have 4 o'clock calls, then they're probably heading out about now. So I'm going to wrap up by saying thank you very, very much to our 4 presenters, Tamar, Kevin, Henry and Namisha. We are deeply grateful for your insights and the time you've taken to prepare the presentations and to spend time with us this afternoon. And obviously, we'd like to thank your employers as well, because this is business hours. So that's the DSI, the DWS, AB InBev, and the NCPC. The partners for this webinar have been the Water Resources Group 2030, hosted by the World Bank, Israel in South Africa, the Royal Danish Embassy in South Africa, the Strategic Water Partners Network, and Green Cape. And we'd like to thank our partners as well for putting all the time and effort in, extending the invitations and contributing as much as they have to creating the agenda, and of course to the teamwork that will come up afterwards. So thank you very much also to the audience for dialing in. If you have any questions, then you should have an email address that you received when you filled in the registration form. Feel free to contact Alicia or myself directly, and we can try and put you in touch with whoever is best placed to answer your question. And with that, folks, we will conclude. Thank you so much and goodbye.
Thanks, Joe. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, Joe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.